But the Davidian sect was founded in Waco, and there are still reminders of that original group. Texas News 5's Brian Mylar joins us now from outside the Branch Davidian compound with more on that. And Brian, I was surprised to learn that there are a number of Davidians there.
That's right, Jane. This is referred to as Mount Carmel, but I'll tell you what, the original Mount Carmel was founded some 60 years ago in another area of Waco. And the Davidians that are there now, and anyone else occupying the old Davidian land around that Mount Carmel, say people are getting them confused with these Branch Davidians. Now, it sounds a little bit confusing, but it all boils down to a big difference in religions. On a sunny hillside in Waco known as Mount Carmel sits the worldwide headquarters of the Davidians, a branch of the Seventh-day Adventists. They print pamphlets for members here, have occasional worship services in the chapel, and display the Davidian flag. But this group is having an identity crisis.
Vernon Howell, as his previous name was, is in no connection with us here.
He says the peace-loving, non-violent Davidian sect is in no way connected to the Branch Davidians, holed up in a compound miles away. And they're angry at the trouble David Koresh has been causing.
And so he's not a Davidian.
Not a Davidian.
Not Mount Carmel.
He's not a Seventh-day Adventist.
He's not Jesus Christ.
He's not Jesus Christ. We do not believe in bearing arms. We are non-combatant.
Just across the street, Vanguard College Prep School is also dealing with a Davidian link. The Davidians used to own this property, and in the library, a clock on the floor is a reminder. Its hands are poised on the 11th hour, signifying the end of the world. And below ground, tunnels once used by the Davidians for some purpose are now sealed up. Another remnant of the Davidians who used to occupy this campus is a shepherd's crook inlaid in the cement floor of a building that used to stand here. It's a Davidian symbol because David of biblical fame was a shepherd. Even though there's no Koresh connection, there were some concerned parents.
I had checked out with the Waco police and the FBI. Was there any legitimate reason to have a concern for our students? And what?
There is none, but Davis is ready for this ordeal to end just the same. And again, this is the Branch Davidian compound here outside the town of Elk, or the area of Elk near Waco. And that school and the Davidians living over there in Mount Carmel in Waco have no connection with these folks here, or at least not in the present day anyway. And there's just some pretty fascinating relics on that ground over there.
Very confusing, Brian. Thanks a lot for the report. We're going to have to follow our Davidians closely to make
That's
sure.
interesting information.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Now, David Koresh's Branch Davidians aren't the only Davidians here in Waco. In fact, this is the international headquarters of a Davidian sect that aligns itself with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Its leader is no stranger to David Koresh, as Channel 8's Michael Hill reports.
So how long have you been a Davidian?
Unlike the self-appointed cult leader David Koresh, Norman Archer is the elected chairman of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. Archer's incurred the wrath of Koresh when Koresh has babbled about the Bible.
Most of the time I talk to him, you know, I could highlight his inconsistency so easy. Because, you see, I know from where he's coming from, you see. So I could just open up to him and then, you know, get angry sometimes. He said, are you going to reject my message? You know, and he behaved like that.
Well, you know what they think of me? They think I'm the Son of God.
Both Davidian groups trace their roots to the 1930s split with the Adventist Church. Both believe the second coming is near. But Archer rejects Koresh's polygamous, violent, weapons stockpiling ways.
Those manifest clearly that God is not speaking with him.
Waco is the worldwide headquarters of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. There is no church, there is no congregation, and it is not a commune. Its main business is publishing, and this is its publishing house. The association favors resting on the seventh day of the week and keeping and observing the Sabbath. So do mainstream Seventh-day Adventists. But while some liberal churches may go along with wearing makeup and jewelry, the association condemns it.
For example, a Christian should not go around painting their faces with all these makeup and all these things, you know, jewelry and all these things, because a Christian must be different. The Lord says, I have a peculiar people. So when somebody sees you, you must be seen as a person reflecting Christ's image.
The association says one of its early leaders prophesied something like this, as tragic as it is, would happen to draw the world's attention to Davidians in Waco.
Definitely a fulfillment of prophecy. It's a divine intervention of the Lord. Not only that, I mean, this thing could have been over with by Sunday, and the mass media wouldn't reach here. But the Lord's hand is in it. He said, I have to wait a little longer. And the media here having nothing to do, they just come looking for us, you know. It's providence.
Archer met Koresh 8 years ago and has always thought of the cult leader as a zealot posing as a prophet. Archer says he last saw Koresh at the compound in November when Koresh was wearing a braid and appeared more fanatical. What does Archer think of God speaking to Koresh?
I wouldn't say the Lord is talking to him because I think that from the very beginning he's led by the devil.
Got people shot. Get the hell out.
Archer says when Koresh has satisfied his ego, he'll give up and the standoff will end.
Did you think he was capable of this, Koresh?
No, I know he's capable of giving up, of producing a lot of theories and ideologies, but I didn't see his capability to get into the arms race, you know.
Michael Hill, Channel 8 News, Waco.
The doomsday preacher now says he doesn't like being compared to Jesus Christ. David Koresh today told negotiators he's just a prophet. But religious groups are praying for him that he will give up the siege. Let's join Sue Speck near Waco. Sue?
Fran, this is the Sabbath for the Davidians. There's a lot of speculation here about whether that's going to change anything. But we found members of the mainstream group from which Koresh claims origins who say it should. The printing press at the Mount Carmel Center was churning out literature this afternoon.
This particular beast, it is said in Revelation 13, is like a lamb, but speak as a dragon.
Ironically, today about false prophets, which the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists believe David Koresh is. The publishing business is how this group spreads its message. It is their work, but it all stops at sundown, the beginning of Sabbath.
Safely through another week.
Through sundown tomorrow, they will be singing, praying, and reading meditations.
Family religion consists in bringing up the children in the...
It is presumably similar to what the Davidian cult members are doing tonight, if Norman Archer says David Koresh's perversion of this religion has not eliminated the practice. If he still does believe, Archer predicts a quiet time in the crisis.
I hope he will have a Sabbath day and peaceful, no problem. And if he should come to the point of maybe releasing anybody, I think he would maybe start that negotiation back on Sunday, maybe not on Sabbath.
So you think? Certainly something to watch over the next 20 hours.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm James Lynch. Day 7 of the Waco standoff is our top story. The FBI and 23 women and children have been released from inside the compound. Another group unwilling to relax this week has been in high gear trying to protect its reputation. KLTV's Jeff Brady has been in Waco since the beginning of the ordeal and files this report from a Waco publishing house.
Since 1935, Waco, Texas has been the source of the Davidian word. This publishing house now produces about 5,000 copies a day of Davidian tracts, leaflets, and manuals for worldwide distribution. But over the last week, even that amount has not been enough, these Davidians say, to clarify where they and branch Davidians differ. They say where David Koresh relies on firepower for strength, they rely on a holy fire.
Dependence on God for deliverance in the end of time. A most fundamental difference. There's no connection with our policies.
That's already been released.
These printers have showed up at nearly every media gathering near Waco this week to protect their group from the negative notoriety focused on one group of Davidians. Despite all the confusion and bad press this week, the Davidians believe this entire episode actually serves a higher purpose and will open a genuine mass audience to their published beliefs.
It is being utilized by the Lord, because by so doing, the Lord calls the world of TV, news media, to come to Waco.
And for at least the last week, the national media has been here, spotlighting an evil son of this tiny church, but Davidians in Waco believe for the ultimate purpose of a holy son. In Waco, Jeff Brady, East Texas News.
That land in Waco has been Davidian property since 1935, when the movement's founder moved there from Los Angeles. Another clarification now: it has taken nearly a week to figure out exactly the name of the compound now surrounded by the FBI. Mount Carmel, they say, actually refers to a residential community near Waco. Their publishing house operates out of an old Protestant church in the neighborhood. The Davidians claim David Koresh named his compound New Mount Carmel, or as some like to call it, Apocalypse Ranch. But the Davidians say the negative message may stick.
The name Mount Carmel becomes very prominent in relationship to him. His place is not called Mount Carmel. It is called Ranch Apocalypse. no one seems to recognize that. But yesterday it was in the paper that that is the name of the place, the real name, not Mount Carmel.
Those Davidians worshipped at the Waco Seventh-day Adventist Church.
The Jewish observance of Passover begins tomorrow at sundown. Cult leader David Koresh says in the past he has received religious messages during the observance and that he has raised hopes that the Passover season could bring an end to the standoff. Dr. Lynn Tatum of Baylor University is an expert on the Old Testament, and he joins us now live from our Waco newsroom to give some insight into the religious implications of Passover. Dr. Tatum, what is the significance of Passover in the Old Testament and the Christian tradition?
Well, in the Old Testament, by far and away, the most important event in all of Old Testament history is the Exodus from Egypt. The Passover is the Jewish commemoration of that event. It refers to, of course, the angel of death, the final of the 10 plagues that came upon Egypt. The angel of death passed over the houses of those Hebrews that were marked by the blood. In the New Testament, Passover plays a very important role because, of course, we have to remember that Jesus, Peter, all of the early disciples were, in fact, Jews. And like every good Jew, if they possibly could, during the Passover season, they would go to Jerusalem there to participate in the so-called Passover feast, which included a feast of unleavened bread. Therefore, it becomes important in the New Testament because Jesus, with his disciples, are in Jerusalem. They're celebrating a Passover meal. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all present the Last Supper of Jesus as a Passover meal. It's also and since Jesus was crucified at Passover, resurrected on the subsequent Sunday, Christians set Easter in essence by Passover. We Christians have also taken over many of the theological issues from Passover. We'd like to talk about we are saved because we are covered by the blood of the Lamb, again referring back to the Passover Lamb. So much of the imagery and theology that Christians derive about Easter derives actually out of the Jewish Passover.
Hey, the Branch Davidians are a splinter group of the better-known Seventh-day Adventists, and although Koresh seems to have his own agenda, what can you tell us about the Seventh-day Adventist attitude towards Old Testament observances?
Well, you're right to emphasize the fact that they are not Seventh-day Adventists. They're a splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventists. But the Adventists, from the very inception, have always been interested in the Old Testament more so than other groups, other mainline Christian groups. The Seventh-day Adventists started in the 1840s. They thought the world was coming to an end, and that was a major theme that's always run through Adventist theology. They thought the world was going to end in 1843, 1844. It did not. One of the reasons they explained for it not coming to an end was that Christians hadn't been observing some of the Old Testament rituals as much as they should, particularly the Sabbath observance. So always Adventists have had a very strong emphasis in the Old Testament, more so than the typical Christian.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tatum.
Thank you.
David Koresh and his followers are said to be almost self-sufficient in their religious compound, but perhaps not as self-sufficient as the original Davidians who moved to Waco more than half a century ago. In the last 4 years now, local coin collectors have turned up currency once used by the Davidians under founder Victor Hotef. One present Davidian leader says that Hotef had an actual bank on the 400-acre property, and during the Great Depression, the group used the specially printed currency in the site's general store.
They bought things in bulk, and they would have a shop on the property there, and they would buy some among themselves, and that way they would not have to spend their money out to the public, and that way the community could survive the Great Depression because of it.
Archer says the Davidians went back to using U.S. currency in the 1940s, and the Depression currency was then split up when the group moved from the original Mount Carmel site in 1958. Although no end to the standoff is in sight, federal agents have a plan to control the media coverage when it does finally come. Agents have decided on a pool system, much like the one used during the Gulf War. Television and print organizations will be represented by one photographer and one reporter who will share their information and pictures with the nation and with the rest of the world. The reporter-photographer teams were drawn randomly at today's news conference. Federal agents have said that they will wait as long as it takes to achieve a peaceful end to the siege. One of them, Rick Ross, has been researching the Branch Davidians and working with families of cult members since 1988. News Channel 10 spoke with Ross by phone from Arizona this evening and asked him why David Koresh is releasing members of the cult if he believes that they should be willing to sacrifice all for their beliefs.
I think that there are people in the compound who are very distressed over what's going on. They're having doubts. In fact, Hal has taken to this kind of practice of interviewing people before they leave, which is not unusual. It's part of his background. In fact, the young man I deprogrammed out of the Waco Davidians in 1992 in July talked about how he was afraid to talk to Hal before he left the compound, or David Koresh, because he would be put through this kind of hot-seat process where Koresh would give him the third degree about leaving the compound or anyone else.
The Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel are demonstrably self-sufficient, but not perhaps as self-sufficient as the original Davidians who settled here during the Great Depression. Shelley Lockhart reports.
The original Davidians who settled here more than a half a century ago actually at one time had their own currency. Yes, their own official money. Bookstore owner Avery Von Blond Jr. has Davidian money dating back to 1938. Von Blond says he came across the bills 3 years ago at a coin and stamp show.
Being that it was a Waco-related item, it aroused my curiosity of Waco memorabilia.
A local coin collector, Dalton Adams, bought the original group of bills from George Roden, the son of the man who later founded the splinter group, the Branch Davidians. But Adams says Roden never mentioned what the currency was used for.
It was just that was left over from way back when they moved the Carmel Center out to where it's at now.
Roden is believed to have used the currency when he was part of the original group of Davidians founded by Victor Hutef. The present leader of that group, Norman Archer, says Hutef opened a bank called the Bank of Palestina and printed their own currency. He says the group used the currency during the Great Depression in their general store on the compound.
They bought things in bulk and they would have a shop on the property there and they would buy some among themselves, and that way they would not have to send their money out to the public. And that way the community could survive the Great Depression.
Archer says the Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel probably don't use their own currency. He says it was a method of self-sufficiency for the first Davidians during a rough decade. In Waco, Shelley Lockhart, News Channel 10 Tonight.
April 14th is now the day federal agents are hoping will bring the end of their standoff with Branch Davidian cult members near Waco. This is day 39 of the siege. It, of course, began with a deadly shootout that killed at least 7 people. Negotiators hope that after cult members celebrate their Passover, they will come out of their armed compound. But as News 36's Marla Bean has discovered, tonight there are more questions about their beliefs.
You may be surprised to learn that this is Mount Carmel, 2500 Mount Carmel Drive to be exact. It's where Davidian Seventh-day Adventists do most of their printing of literature to explain their beliefs.
He says that I'm going to mark the faithful ones and I will slay the unfaithful ones. Now, this is what we refer to now as the next Passover significance.
The Davidians are an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. From that group sprang the Branch Davidians, along with some new customs.
We must observe feast days. For example, new moon, Passover, but those are not anything traditionally observed by Davidians nor Seventh-day Adventists.
There is some spiritual significance to the time of Passover for Davidians. But if you take a look at their literature, you'll know it's not an event that's celebrated. That's just one of the differences between the Davidians and Koresh's followers. Still, there's some skepticism as to just how significant this event really is for Koresh.
Previously, we had assurances from the attorneys that after Passover was over, they have given us their guarantees that these people would be coming out. So now not only do we have to have Passover to take place, but Mr. Koresh is still waiting for his message from God.
I don't think that there is a genuine thing behind the observance of the Passover for Koresh. To me, it's just another time to buy some more time.
Whatever Koresh's true beliefs about Passover, federal agents seem to believe it does mean more time, but it's hard to tell what it'll mean when that holy period is over. Near Waco, Marla Bean, News 36.
Agents involved in negotiations say the Branch Davidian Passover celebration has been underway since last night. Cult leaders have offered to surrender once their Passover celebration is over, but members of this Seventh-day Adventist church say their teachings do not call for a celebration of Passover, and they're skeptical about Koresh's holiday.
That there isn't a genuine thing behind the observance of the Passover for Koresh. To me, it's just another time to buy some more time.
So now not only do we have to have Passover to take place, but Mr. Koresh is still waiting for his message from God.
Agents are hopeful the standoff will end on April 13th. That's the day that Koresh says his Passover will be over. In Waco tonight, federal agents continue to wait and watch for David Koresh to make his move. The cult leader today told negotiators that the standoff could end after Passover. Koresh and his followers will begin observing their version of the religious holiday tomorrow at sundown. Channel 7's Mary Benton is near the Branch Davidian compound, and she joins us now live, and she has the latest on that for you. Mary?
Well, Neil, federal agents talked with David Koresh early this morning to clear up the confusion about when the Branch Davidian Passover actually begins. And they found out that, like everything else in this standoff, Koresh has decided how and when he will celebrate this religious holiday. The first sign of moonlight over the Branch Davidian compound will mark the beginning of Passover for David Koresh and his followers. Koresh has told negotiators that overcast skies on Monday forced cult members to delay the traditional Jewish holiday until Wednesday at sundown. But it's unclear whether 8 days of feasting and praying will move Koresh to surrender peacefully.
We're hopeful that it ends on the 14th, but you're aware of the various dates that he's said as well as I am, and it hasn't happened yet. This is just another date in a long series. I'm just nervous if they start bringing up Christmas.
Across town in Waco, at the site of the original Mount Carmel, another group of Davidians thinks Koresh is simply stalling for time.
It should start yesterday at sunset. For him to want to do it tomorrow or the other day, obviously he doesn't even know what he himself is about. Obviously. He doesn't believe anything. He's just trying to make time, buy time, to try to fulfill his own self-ego.
Norman Archer says while Koresh is making a symbolic gesture to celebrate Passover, the delayed observance will hold no religious significance. This group of Davidians also believes Koresh has twisted the message of the seven seals. The church is constantly printing out more books on the seven seals, and they don't see it ending with Koresh peacefully surrendering.
I don't think if Mr. Koresh surrenders, it's not because of his desire. It would have to be that the higher power overruled him and let him surrender. Of his own self, I think he would rather die than come out.
Well, federal agents say that at best they will remain semi-respectful of this Passover season for the Branch Davidians. However, they are making clear that they will continue the pressure to get a peaceful surrender quickly. Tonight, for instance, there are new stereo systems set up at the compound, presumably to blast loud music overnight, and also there are lights once again flooding Mount Carmel. Neil?
Rick Ross has been researching the Branch Davidians and working with families of cult members since 1988. News Channel 10 spoke with Ross by phone from Arizona this evening and asked him why David Koresh is releasing members of the cult if he believes that they should be willing to sacrifice all for their beliefs.
I think that there are people in the compound who are very distressed over what's going on. They're having doubts. In fact, Hal has taken to this kind of process of interviewing people before they leave, which is not unusual. It's part of his background. In fact, a young man I deprogrammed out of the Waco Davidians in 1992 in July talked about how he was afraid to talk to Hal before he left the compound, or David Koresh, because he would be put through this kind of hot seat process where Koresh would give him the third degree about leaving the compound or anyone else that wanted to leave.
Mr. Ross has deprogrammed several cult members, and as he just said, some of them Branch Davidians.
Something happened there that shouldn't have happened. The judicial system got completely off track, and we would like to know why. We would like to see an investigation now by the FBI to find out what happened. How come this wasn't stopped 10 years ago? They knew about it. Why was it buried? Because then there would be families tonight that wouldn't be mourning their dead. And that's really sad.
A former member of the religious sect called the cult that we have come to call the Branch Davidian. The cult members who've held the federal agents at bay since Sunday in Waco belong to that group. Joining us this morning is a guest who says he is a deprogrammer of this specific kind of cult. He says he learned of abuses in the cult last year when he got one 7-year-old member out. His name is Rick Ross, and he joins us from Dallas. Morning, Mr. Ross.
Good morning.
You have had dealings with one or more than one member of this cult.
I've dealt with the Davidians in 3 separate cases, one specifically in July of this year from the compound in Waco.
Was that the 7-year-old girl?
I was a 7-year member who was a male adult member of the group.
And did you get him out in some way? Did you deprogram him? What were you doing?
He was successfully deprogrammed, and he was one of the many members in the group who would come in and out of the compound. His family retained me when he came out of the compound for one visit to deprogram him, which was successful.
In order to do that, did he have to be held by force, restrained from returning to the compound?
No, his family persuaded him to voluntarily sit and talk with me for quite a few days, and then he voluntarily decided never to return to the compound.
Are you in touch with or dealing with any members of the group who are in the compound right now?
I'm not in touch with members of the group, but I'm in touch with some of their families.
Of those who are in there right now?
Yeah, there is one family in particular that I'm in touch with, and they've asked me to make an appeal to Steve Snyder, who is one of the primary members of the group, to please call your family, call Sue, as soon as you can. They would like to talk to him.
All right. Would you describe the group as you understand it, Mr. Ross? What are its characteristics?
Well, essentially, for all intents and purposes, David Koresh is the only thinking and functioning controlling factor in this group. They're completely dependent on him. In fact, this group of the Davidians could best be described as a spin-off of a spin-off. That is that Howdif spun off from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but this really is even aberrational to the Howdif group and is a spin-off of the Howdif teachings of the Davidians. For example, they're eating meat. They have drank alcoholic beverages. This is strictly forbidden by the original Davidians. So really what these people are is a group of people who are totally dependent on one man and one man only, and that is this David Koresh. Whatever he says is what God says.
All right, there were Davidians before him then. Apparently Davidian is not an extension of his name, personally. Is that right?
Well, the name Davidian really is an allusion to the Davidic kingdom or the Davidic throne. That has a link to the flag they've recently raised, in which it's basically the Israeli flag with a serpent embedded in the star. What they're really alluding to is the restoration of the Davidic kingdom, the restoration of the Davidic throne, which was a theme of Victor Howdif. In fact, one of the pretenders to the prophetic mantle of Howdif after he died in 1955 was a man by the name of George Roden. Roden went so far as to have villages in Israel where members could go to. So they have constantly had this strong feeling towards Palestine or Israel.
All right. They have been releasing children. Somewhere between 10 and 16 children have been freed over the course of the past a couple of days. What is the role of the kids in this organization?
First of all, about 3 children in the compound are Koresh's by his own marriage, but 10 are the result of his relations with women outside of his own marriage. So about half of the children, and I've heard reports from members that there are as many as 30 children in the compound, about half of the children are in fact Koresh's.
What do you stand to be the general day-to-day ambience or atmosphere in the compound? You haven't been in the compound, have you?
It would have been impossible for me to enter into the compound.
What do you infer it's like in there?
I would say that these people feel that this is the end of the world as they know it. This is perhaps the day of judgment that they have been preached to for hours upon hours upon hours in long sessions of Koresh, conditioning their minds to accept this moment, this juncture, when they would confront the end of the world, and they are the army of God.
Can this standoff, Mr. Ross, be resolved peacefully, and if so, how best?
You know, I've racked my brain about it. I've thought, would there have been anything that anyone could have done to enter that compound that would not have resulted in this type of violence? And I don't know that Koresh would ever tolerate anyone giving him his advice or offering any input. He feels that he is in charge, and he is obsessive about the fact that he is in control. Anyone entering this compound would have been assaulted. Myself, families, if they were not properly cleared by Koresh, and of course the authorities.
Mr. Ross, if you'll stay right there, we'd like to continue our conversation after we take a brief break. We are talking with Cult deprogrammer Rick Ross, who has more than a passing familiarity with the Branch Davidian, now in its second day of a standoff with about 400 law enforcement officers in near Waco, Texas. A standoff which has so far been bloody, resulting in the deaths of at least 6 people that we know of. Mr. Ross, have you talked with the authorities on this?
Previous to all this beginning, yes, I was contacted by Texas authorities with firearms control, and they interviewed me extensively, and also I put them in touch with people who could also supply them with firsthand accounts of what was stockpiled there, what was going on as recently as in July.
Do you feel that news coverage of this situation, including this interview, is helping or hurting?
I feel that, in general, the media so many times has acted as a watchdog over these groups. I've heard people say, why wasn't this dealt with before? Why didn't something happen? Why didn't somebody stop these people? And in fact, there are other groups across the country who have as much or more weapons and are just as dangerous. And the answer is, so many times people just don't want to deal with this. The authorities, because of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, feel that they don't want to intrude in sects like this sect. And the media has offered a spotlight to warn the public and to advise people of what's going on, and even to prevent people from being recruited who, if it was not for media coverage, would not even know that these groups were dangerous or a threat to them.
Well, how about the freedom of religion issue? This is a group that is or lays claim to being a religion. At what stage or point does a group go over the line and call for outside intervention?
Well, just because a group claims to be religious does not mean they can do anything. They may believe anything and have faith in anything, but not do anything. And the First Amendment is not a suicide pact in which our government or our public authorities are saying go ahead and have free reign. When they begin to abuse children, when they become violent, when they do things that harm the public and their members, they deserve to be monitored. They deserve to be restricted. And I've seen horrific things done in the name of God that should have been prevented and could have been prevented.
What kind of people, Mr. Ross, are susceptible to the kind of brainwashing you described?
The sad thing is, Bob, that everyone in our country is susceptible. Many of us would like to go into denial about this. We'd like to pretend like it couldn't happen to me, it couldn't happen to anyone I know or I love. I've dealt with families that seem like Ward and June Cleaver, the proverbial American family, and yet their son or daughter, bright, intelligent, no history of problems, no psychological background, no drug abuse, became involved in a destructive group. There are people in that compound now who are highly educated, articulate, bright, caring people. In fact, these people have at times acted as if to their families that they had doubts about David Koresh, but he's controlled them. There is such a thing as brainwashing. There is such a thing as thought reform and mind control. And if people are caught in the web of a group like this, they can go under, lose their ability to critically think, and make value judgments of their own, become dependent on a leader like David Koresh, and it may lead them to disaster.
Are you, in your role as a critic and certainly an opposing force to this organization, in danger yourself?
I've been threatened many times, and that's just part of what comes with my work. I've received hate mail, death threats. I've been followed by cult groups. That's just part of what it's all about.
How do you deprogram someone who has been brainwashed as thoroughly as you describe it inside the compound?
Well, it took many days for me to work with the young man that in fact I successfully brought out of this sect. And I think that people misunderstand what deprogramming is. In essence, the group has programmed the member. They've imposed a kind of program or thought reform means of mind control on the member. My job, if you will, is to unravel their program, find the cracks, find the flaws in it, and release the person's mind so that they can think freely. This involves many different elements, many different approaches. It may involve looking critically at the way the group jumps around in the Bible. For example, David Koresh, he does quite a tap dance through the scriptures, jumping around, grabbing one scripture in the Old Testament, another in the New, and linking them arbitrarily without any grounding or any reference that is their historical means of relationship. So part of my work
is to show members how the Bible has been manipulated, how the Bible has been used not as a means of helping them in their faith, but as a tool to control them. Another might be going into the leaders.
The group from which the Branch Davidians originated held a church meeting to help improve the negative image created by David Koresh and his followers. The Davidians were founded by Victor Houteff in the 1930s, from which a small group broke away, forming the Branch Davidians, later led by Koresh. The original Davidians still hold church services at the site of the original Mount Carmel on Lakeshore Drive in Waco. What they say is the negative image Koresh created of all Davidians.
When we gathered here, we definitely came to make plans how we will deal with the Koresh situation, because it definitely will affect our work. So we have to make plans how we're going to deal with the psychological effects, the moral effects, the doctrinal effects, because we think that Mr. Koresh has been given a wrong signal to the world as to what the Davidian message is all about.
No matter what your personal reaction is, you probably do feel moved by the large number of people who died in the tragedy.
And you are not alone. People in Waco were mourning those who died inside the compound, while they, at the same time, they were also asking questions. Our team report continues with Ken Kaltoff, who was at that memorial service. Ken?
Jan, nowhere have people been following this controversy and its tragic conclusion more closely than here in Waco. Waco is a place that considers itself a religious community, and today people in Waco began trying to put this tragedy behind them with a memorial service. People of all denominations gathered at a Waco Presbyterian church to mourn the cult members who died.
The 10 billion words that have been written, the speculations that have been made, the fingers of blame that have been pointed, all make no difference here.
Texas Governor Ann Richards, a native of Waco, was there as her town begins to heal.
This whole ordeal, I know, has been a difficult one to watch for everyone.
Of course, everybody's just in shock and deeply saddened about what happened.
Others who follow the Davidian faith, of which the cult was an offshoot, are passing out flyers in Waco.
We, of course, are genuine Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and Koresh is about 3 or 4 times removed from the genuine Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. There you go. It's on the 7th seal.
Davidian Seventh-day Adventists want to separate their teachings from those of David Koresh.
Okay. Meanwhile, in Waco, a group of Seventh-day Adventists is meeting.
Sue Speck talked with the leaders of the religious group that Koresh claims gave rise to his Branch Davidian sect.
Every controversy, every reproach, every slander will be God's means of provoking inquiry and awakening minds that would otherwise slumber.
This is Waco's other Mount Carmel, the other Davidians of the Seventh-day Adventist Church who never claimed David Koresh, but who see the tragedy at the compound as an opportunity.
The situation in Elk has brought reproach, so to speak, for the onlooker. But then, from our perspective, these reproach may be God's means to cause an inquiry, to awaken minds into even the 7 seals prophecies. The whole world today is asking questions.
Several dozen Davidians from all over the nation and world have come to the Mount Carmel Center, and while they'll have special services in their sanctuary when their Sabbath begins Friday night,
and to pay a bill in a business-like way.
Today they're talking business at a conference scheduled long before the standoff began. But there's constant talk of the compound and discussions of it in informal Bible studies.
Here's a man who's saying that he is Christ.
But there will be no prayers said here for the dead at the compound. This group believes you pray for the living, not for the dead, because it's too late then. Too late for David Koresh, but not too late, they say, to make good of his evil. In Waco, Sue Speck, Fox News.
Ironically, Waco is hosting a national convention for Davidians from across the world. About 80 Davidian delegates are meeting at the Mount Carmel Center in Waco for a national conference. Electing a new national governing board is the main topic of discussion at the conference, but there have also been talks about the standoff at Mount Carmel. The Davidians are also discussing the possible effects of the tragic ending to the standoff and ways to tell the public about differences between their group and David Koresh's followers.
And it will have an effect upon us, but it may not stay very long, because we are now publicly making known that we are not connected with Koresh. And we would rather have people calling them Christians and not Davidians.
Most Central Texans are still trying to put behind them the tragic events of the 51-day standoff between Branch Davidians and federal authorities. But one group, perhaps more than any other, is still fighting to maintain a separate identity from the cult members. As Seal Spouse reports, the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists are working to build their own faith and distinguish themselves from David Koresh and his followers.
Now I want to touch on
This is the annual session of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, or DSDA. The believers from around the world are at the Mount Carmel Center in Waco for business and religious meetings. Now, this group is not new to the area. The DSDA bought this church activity center just over 3 years ago. Since then, members have worked to establish their own religious identity, which they say differs substantially from the religion practiced by David Koresh and his followers.
We are a basic organization like any organization that you may find in Waco. We have a board of directors that runs the operation, and no one person can dictate or brainwash anybody.
Ministerial Director Norman Archer estimates there are about 2,000 DSDA members worldwide and says the Waco group consists of about 35 people, many of whom are from Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean. The group is actively recruiting new members from around the world, and some members have recently bought homes in the neighborhoods surrounding the Waco church.
Well, the movement will be growing and is growing, and we do believe that as many other out-of-state believers decide to move to Waco, they'll continue to buy homes, and we think there'll be a rise of the acquiring of more homes in Waco, and it's in the suburbs too.
One of the group's neighbors says he finds nothing out of the ordinary about the growth of the church as the new members arrive. Vanguard School's headmaster Ed Davis says DSDA members have often visited him and his school. Vanguard is on the site of the original home of the Davidians, who moved to Waco more than half a century ago.
We restored just normal relationships, and we visit back and forth, and I really enjoy them. They're a very interesting group of people.
The members of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists say in the aftermath of the disaster near Elk, the door is open for them to spread the word of their beliefs, not just throughout Central Texas, but also across the country and the rest of the world. In Waco, Seal Spels, News Channel 10 Tonight.
Well, much of the controversy surrounding the cult stems from its leader, David Koresh. Koresh is also known as Vernon Howell, and many of his followers are reportedly former members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, many current Seventh-day Adventist Church members are distancing themselves from the cult. They say Koresh and his followers are in no way affiliated with them.
Is being identified as a Davidian Seventh-day Adventist, somebody who is very dangerous, who bear arms, and who take lives. Our mission is very much contrary to that.
Mount Carmel has secrets that the dozens of cameras trained on it around the clock simply can't see. We don't know for sure what goes on inside the buildings that fill the compound, nor do we know what may be going on under the ground, where it's believed the Davidians have constructed a rough network of bunkers and tunnels. But we do know a little more about the tunnel system constructed at the site of the original Davidian compound. Janet Gregg has that story.
Stories of the tunnels beneath the original Mount Carmel compound near Lake Waco have circulated for years. They were evidently constructed to link the buildings and the church across the street. And there's even a long one headed toward the lake that was never completed. And it appears a similar system of tunnels may run under portions of the Mount Carmel compound where David Koresh and his followers are holding authorities at bay. The original Mount Carmel facility was built under the direction of Davidian prophet B.T. Hotef, who came to Waco in 1935 and died in 1955. It's now in the center of a residential neighborhood. Nowhere in his extensive writings is there a mention of the tunnels, neither is there mention of them by a Hotef follower in a lengthy oral history compiled by two Baylor professors. But the tunnels are there. The entrances have long been sealed up, and some tunnels have reportedly collapsed in the middle. No one knows how the tunnel system figured into Hotef's apocalyptic vision of the future. In 1957, Hotef's widow sold the property and moved the Davidians to this site. Even before this standoff began, there were rumors of a similar tunnel network beneath the Elk compound. On March 4th, the Associated Press quoted ATF agent Ted Royster, confirming the existence of underground passages connecting various parts of the compound. McLennan County Sheriff's investigator Ronnie Turnbow, who declined an on-camera interview, told AP that authorities had aerial photographs showing the underground passages as they were being built. That supports a report by former cult member Connie Harvey Beeson. Work may have continued on the tunnels, according to one published report that attributes the information to ATF Associate Director Dan Hartnett. But because agents aren't talking about tactics, there's no way to know what impact a network of tunnels on the inside could have on strategies on the outside. And the importance is as much a mystery as the reason for the tunnels at the original site where the Davidians first gathered to await the end of the world. Janet Gregg, News Channel 10, Waco.
David Koresh repeatedly refers to a portion of the book of Revelation in the Bible that talks about the seven seals.
That explains why much of what he has had to say is hard for most of us to understand. Tonight, Janet Gregg attempts a brief explanation of what the seals are and what they mean.
Some Davidians have returned to the site of the original Davidian commune launched by their founding father, V.T. Hotep, and are taking advantage of the standoff to promote their faith and religious heritage. They bought a piece of the original Mount Carmel complex in 1991 to headquarter the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventist 7-member council. The Mount Carmel Center is also where they print their literature. Today, they printed 2,000 40-page pamphlets for the media, explaining the seven seals David Koresh has repeatedly referred to throughout the siege. A full explanation of the meaning of each seal can be lengthy and very detailed. Each contains many symbolic messages.
After listening to his 45-minute sermon or 59-minute sermon on the radio, it was clear to us that he did not explain to the world what the seven seals really are. So we felt the responsibility to make this information known to the world at this time, that there is a meaning to the seven seals and that it is available from the Davidians. We want to make this available to the world.
But in brief, the Davidian faith centers on judgment through 7 periods of time, each represented by a seal. The first covers the time from creation to the Great Flood. It contains a white horse symbolizing the purity of God's new world and a rider symbolizing Adam and his descendants. The second seal, a red horse and rider, encompasses the time from the flood to Abraham and symbolizes loss of peace, the spread of sin throughout the world, and the beginning of wars. The third seal, which covers the time from Abraham to Christ, contains a black horse and rider and stands for spiritual darkness, when mankind lost God's word and turned to idol worship. The move from the third to the fourth seal coincides with the change from the Old Testament to the New in the Bible. The fourth seal stretches from Christ to 1500 A.D. A pale horse and a death rider mark a return to God's word, along with the persecution of Christians by the Romans. The fifth seal runs from 1500 to 1755 and is the first not represented by a horse of color. This seal denotes the continuation of Christian persecution with the symbol of an altar under which are the souls of the slain. Davidians believe we are living in the time of the sixth seal, which contains images of extreme natural catastrophe and symbolizes the end of time. This period began in 1755 with the Great Lisbon earthquake and will end with the marking and saving of the faithful and the killing of all others. The seventh seal represents the judgment of the living, a time of great glorification of God, and a last chance to join the faith. When the time of the seventh seal ends, Davidians believe 7 plagues will fall upon the earth, the last being Armageddon, after which will occur the second coming of Christ. Janet Gregg, News Channel 10, Waco.
If you didn't get all of that, you can get a copy of the Davidian pamphlet outlining the meaning of the seven seals. Just pick one up at the Mount Carmel Center. That's located at 2500 Mount Carmel, and that's in Waco.
One local church is taking a step to spread what it says is the real meaning of the seven seals. David Koresh has continually brought up the seals during negotiations, and he challenged religious leaders to decipher the meaning of the seven seals. Now, members of the Mount Carmel Center are distributing a booklet detailing those seals. The group has distributed more than 300 of the pamphlets, hoping to clear up some of the mystery about the seals' meaning. And they have had what they call some surprising response.
Drastic world events as far as calamities in the world and the natural disasters, all of those are wrapped up there within the seven seals. And the world needs to know that God is in control, and He wants them to be responsive to His signs.
You can get a copy of the booklet by calling or writing the Mount Carmel Center. The Davidians here continue to stress the fact that the group involved in the standoff is in no way involved with the Mount Carmel Center. Former members of the Branch Davidians say David David Koresh preached to followers that Armageddon is here. The book of Revelation refers to Armageddon as the last battle between Satan and Christ. One Baylor professor says that the New Testament, Matthew 24:36, states, no one knows when Armageddon will take place.
No one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. It's not the kind of knowledge that would have been given to a prophet.
Baylor professors say Koresh's immediate demand for interpretation of the Bible may lead him to believe his confrontation is Armageddon.
Standoff in Waco drags on. The curious gather.
1, 2, 3.
By the dozens, they flock to the closest vantage point, a hill a couple of miles from the Branch Davidian compound. 2 podiatrists from Washington State want to treat the wounded. Entrepreneurs capitalize on a bad situation.
How much are the t-shirts? $4. And why are you selling them? Make $1.
Others support cult leader David Koresh's constitutional rights.
I'm in sympathy with him. I still believe in America that we still have a constitution that protects our rights to be what we want to be.
Today, the FBI identified 2 dead Branch Davidians. Michael Schroeder of Florida, whose body was recovered still clutching a semi-automatic pistol, and Australian Peter Gent, buried this week on the grounds by cult members. His parents don't believe it.
I'm going to refuse to fall apart until I've got some concrete evidence from the authorities that they have identified the body as to be Peter's.
And for cult member Pablo Cohen, an appeal from his mother in Jerusalem to Koresh.
Please, let your people go and come out to tell your story.
Several others, all the outside influences may be diverting energy from the real point of the negotiations, which is persuading cult members to surrender peacefully. Vicki Mabry, CBS News, Waco.
Straight ahead on tonight's
Now, the association is an organization that seems pretty unhappy with the way ATF is dealing with things down here. They believe that the search warrant that was handed out and exercised about 11 days ago was done improperly, and they think that those in the compound are being treated unfairly.
There's no reason to have a standoff. They take us in there, and within 3 hours from then, we will have it negotiated to where somebody, a third party, like I said, can come in and take these people to the medical help they need.
Paul says his organization is quite sympathetic with Koresh and the other cult members there, and that's basically why they're here. They're willing to help out in any way they possibly can. I think they can resolve the situation much faster than the official agents that are in town doing the job that they're doing now. One other note that I wanted to point out is that we've seen a little bit more activity today from armored vehicles moving around. We're not sure what they're doing, what that means, but there have been quite a heavy traffic of vehicles coming out of the compound and driving around the dirt road that surrounds the compound. Lloyd?
Thanks very much. Jill Spells.
The legal maneuvering has already begun, even as the standoff continues. David Koresh's mother, Bonnie Haldeman, filed papers asking the court for unrestricted access to the cult leader. And as we reported last night, CAUSE, an international Christian legal aid group, is seeking a restraining order to keep federal agents from using deadly force on the Branch Davidians. CAUSE has also lined up 8 attorneys from Texas, Oklahoma, and Washington, D.C. to represent cult members once the standoff is over. Attorney Kirk Lyons says it's an option to end the siege peacefully.
You got 2 guys duking it out, and then the one guy that was hitting the other guy is now the negotiator. I mean, really, that doesn't work. You need to bring a minister, an independent person, an attorney, anybody to go in there and break the deadlock here. Push the 2 parties aside.
Among the attorneys Lyons has lined up, Wacoans Gary Coker, Vic Fizell, and Houston attorney Dick DeGuerin.
The director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms today defended the actions of his agents to a House subcommittee in Washington. Stephen Higgins told the panel that appropriates the agency's funding that his agents carried out their mission to the letter, and the officers did exactly what they were trained to do. Higgins had little patience with the criticism the Bureau has endured since the raid.
I noticed some of the critics said we made a frontal assault on that. We don't make no-knock warrants. In that case, in Waco, as in a lot of cases, we had an agent exit, yelled to the house that he was a federal officer there to serve warrants. There was an individual in the door that heard what he said. That individual slammed the door, and the next thing we knew, fire came out.
Higgins insisted the mission was compromised when a tip was made to cult members shortly before the Sunday raid that was 11 days ago.
A Texas religious leader says the events at Mount Carmel and the numbers of people being released from the compound can be related to the events in the Bible. Reporter Sean Rad has more on the founder of a Tribe of Joseph Church of Philadelphia.
If you'll read all 6 books of the Old Testament, you will see everything that's happening in Mount Carmel.
Larry Frankham is the founder of an alternative church called the Tribe of Joseph Church of Philadelphia. Frankham says everything happening near Waco can be found in the Bible, even the name of the Davidian compound.
1 Kings 18th chapter and 20th verse, and it states, "And he'll gather his prophets unto Mount Carmel."
Frankham believes Koresh's request for milk had a biblical connection.
Isaiah chapter 28 and verse 9, and it says, "Who shall he teach knowledge, and whom shall we make understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk." See, he was talking about the milk of God, the Word of God.
Frankham feels Koresh's message, "God help us, we want the press," hung from a compound window, was spiritual in nature, while other banner calls for the press were carnal. He points to Micah chapter 5, verse 5 to explain the recent releases.
Then shall we raise him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. These 7 shepherds, I feel like, were the 7 people that were released at that one time.
Nor does he believe Passover or Easter will end the standoff.
They would not use a spiritual situation to turn themselves over to a carnal law enforcement agency.
Many people suggest as we move towards the turn of the century, many more alternative religions and cults will arise preaching an apocalyptic message. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree with that. The Bible is plain about many false prophets, many false Christs will rise in the last days. And the Bible states that even if it were possible, they would have fooled even the elect.
Near Kaufman, Texas, Sean Rabb for CBS News.
The Waco outlet of Joshua's Christian Stores and the customers who frequent the bookstore is, says manager Chris Schlump, a pretty accurate gauge of the way the Christian community is viewing the ongoing Mount Carmel standoff.
For those that really study the Bible personally and have a personal relationship with the God of the Bible and really are in touch with it, those people are not fazed at all. Those people are, they expected it because they read about it in the prophecy of the Bible. Just recently, Vernon Howell came out and said that he was a prophet, and the Bible talks about that too. That in the end times there are false prophets, and it's predicted in the Bible, it's prophesied in the Bible that would happen, and that is really the true message and the level of conversation among the Christians in this community.
The store carries a variety of Bibles, as well as books dealing with end-time prophecy, books that cover the question of why prophets will arise alleging to speak for God, and interpreting the Bible in order to use its message for personal gain and notoriety.
And it's very plain and very simple. Once you even read the scriptures once through the New Testament, it becomes very clear the picture God drew about this kind of thing happening.
If there is any one sure sign that indicates whether a person proclaiming himself a prophet is speaking truth, his or her words, Schlump says, can easily be put to a test.
Carpenters use what's called a plumb line to true up a wall. And if ever there's anything in your life or you hear any teaching from men or from other books or from anywhere that you're wondering about, hold it to the plumb line. Does it stand true with the plumb line of God? And if it does, if it fits perfectly with this book, then it's truth. If it doesn't, if it wavers at all, then it's only speculation, and it could be true or false.
In Waco, James Napier, News Channel 10.
The Mount Carmel name isn't a new one to religious showdowns. In the Old Testament of the Bible, the prophet Elijah met with more than 400 prophets of Baal, a pagan god, in a showdown over whose God was for real. Elijah's God set fire to an offering soaked in water, while Baal's prophets couldn't bring fire to their offering. Elijah then slew all the false prophets. The entire showdown occurred on a place called Mount Carmel.
Hello? Yes, I've done that. I'm at the treasurer's, the secretary's machine. With the modem and the router? Yeah.
You do that plan?
Yeah, you lost water. Go over to somebody.
You can't talk on that beauty with the pan. Go clean up that.
Yeah, but clean up. It's not good. Yeah, I'm getting there.
Should I, you just want the office, right? Or who are you showing it to? Hello.
Hi, Sister Myrna.
Say treasurer's office or something.
This is Lake Waco.
In the treasurer's office.
The treasurer views the lake from her desk. Now what a beautiful sight. That's interesting. I'm seeing it. Passageway from the office to the chapel, Mount Carmel Chapel. Mount Carmel Chapel. Missionary cars. That's the print shop in the background there. And then this is the main office. And that's a passageway from the office to the chapel. Symbol of identification, location, the cross. Stone works on this building. Stone veneer. Mount Carmel Center. Treasurer's office, that was the front door we were looking through. Office, door to the treasurer's office. Beautiful flowers by her door. Front entrance to Mount Carmel Center. Front entrance. Two of the high-class homes that is close to Mount Carmel Center. A third one in the background there. These are Mount Carmel's pecan trees. Mount Carmel pecan trees. There we have a pecan tree, then we have a peach tree, then we have a apple tree, peach tree, no, that's a pear tree, peach tree. From a little distance we go, we can see that Mount Carmel is still pretty surrounded by a lot of trees, you know. Still surrounded by a lot of trees, despite so many years has passed. There we have a pear tree that's laden with young pears. Again, that's Mount Carmel Center, and quite a few trees around this side. All these trees still on Mount Carmel property. That's a street. That's a street that border the present Mount Carmel Center, that street. Everything on this side of the street belongs to Mount Carmel. Those trees still on Mount Carmel property. And there we go right around until we come across the Vanguard School again. That's the Vanguard School. That building was Brother Hotef's office and dwelling. He used to live upstairs. And there we see the Vanguard. Vanguard School. Vanguard School. Mount Carmel sign. Carmel Center backside. That's a vegetable garden there. All those trees. Now I am on the roof of the print shop, and from this angle I want to give you a broader view of the surrounding scenery. In the foreground there is Lake Waco. And the farmlands behind there. Beautiful farmlands. We have some high-class houses. view, general. Remember, this that I'm looking at there is the roof. This is the roof. And I go up off the roof, and then I look. I'm looking probably maybe 10 miles. I'm seeing 10 miles in the distance. Maybe 10 miles in distance, I'm seeing all these trees. Another high-class house sitting there in the woods. Now my camera basically right now is pointing towards Waco City, and there's not one commercial building in sight. Watch me now. This is the roof of the print shop. That's the fig tree over there. I look in the distance towards Waco, downtown. There's no commercial building in sight, only trees. There are some high-class houses tucked away in those thick woods, and that's it. I go around and I come around right back to the Vanguard School, and that's all you can see from this point on the roof of the print shop. All you can see is trees. So one may say we are in the city, but when God looked from high above, he see a different picture. God still sees us basically in the woods. Still see us in the woods. See, God don't see us men see. So we're basically still in the woods. See? Still in the woods. The print shop, chapel. I moved a little over here again. Another high-class house. Here, that's the building on the Vanguard School. Another building. Still in the woods. Still in the woods. Again, I repeat, my camera is pointing towards downtown Waco, and that's all you can see. This is the direction of the old peach orchard. That is the direction of the old peach orchard, brothers, sisters, and that's all you can see where the old peach orchard was. Are these trees. And a few high-class houses tucked away in the trees. That's it. Old Peach Orchard. Vanguard School again. The chapel, we move to the left. Roof of the chapel, that's the roof of the chapel. See, roof right down to my foot. That's my shoes. I lift up back. I go towards the chapel. I turn a little left. And there I see Lake Waco. Beautiful scenery. That's the scenery I see from my office window. Lake Waco. 50 miles around it. Winding its way through these woods. Lake Waco. Another high-class house tucked away in the woods there. Lake Waco. Lake Waco. Lake Waco. That's a wheat field in the background. That brown section, that's a wheat field. It looks small there, but that could be 100 acres of wheat. Spread out down there in the valley. Lake Waco. This is some of the expensive high-class dwellings on the other side of Mount Carmel's property. This is the other side of Mount Carmel's property that was subdivided for high-class living. We could be about half a mile from the quarters right here. No, maybe a quarter mile. In this neighborhood, people hardly walk in the street. It is so peaceful.
Y al comprender nosotros nuestra ineficiencia para esta obra, nos dejó la preciosa promesa de la...
Here is our tape copying center run by Sister Gooden. She's running off 3 tapes one time on that machine and 3 tapes on that machine. It's done in 2 minutes, both side tape in 2 minutes. So roughly we are copying 6 tape in 2 minutes, both side one time.
Amen. Amen. Why are you coming in here? You want me to spoil that camera?
Those boxes with the green label are blank tapes. They roughly they have in them about 500 tapes. About 500 tapes in each box with the green label.
In 2 Chronicles 7:14, a very familiar text. And I think this text is like a summary of a reformation that God wants to have us see to be experienced. Shall what? Humble themselves. It simply means that we are called people. They are humble. Then the next part says, and pray. I have big families. See, you don't know how to pray. And seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways.
I'm around. Hey, how you doing, man? All right. Everybody's fine. Yeah. No, that's it. Oh, they, yeah, She gave me her email address. I tried to use it, but I'm not sure. Because she sent me a very large check for the ministry. That's what big down plus money for the enough for something. I don't, and they might go to him. Speak to me.
Hi, my name is Sister Winter. How are you doing?
Happy Sabbath, brother. Happy Sabbath.
How are you doing, my brother?
Happy Sabbath.
I'm working on you still playing for me. Happy Sabbath, my sister. I'll get you.
Happy Sabbath, everybody.